Today, from library assistant to JVM advocate, this is Confluent Developer.
And everyone was like, wow, this is amazing, Pratik. And I said, thank you. I did this for myself, but I'm glad you like it too. So I went to the person I worked for and I said, wow, how long have you guys been doing this? Of course, the answer is forever. I said, why don't you let me fix this?
Hey there, everybody. I'm Tim Berglund, and welcome to Confluent Developer, the podcast where we explore the journeys of software developers tackling some of the hardest problems they've ever solved. In this episode, I'm interviewing Pratik Patel. He got his start as a library assistant in college. That was his first job, helping people use computers. And now, as the VP of Developer Relations at Azul, well, he's still kind of doing that same thing. Pratik and I have known each other for a long time, and I talked to him today about an early build automation project he tackled back in the pre-Cambrian era of Java builds, where he learned the importance of having empathy for his fellow developers. Let's get to it. Hey, Pratik, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tim, how you doing?
Doing well. Hey, tell us a little bit about yourself. What are you doing right now?
Yeah, so I lead the developer relations team at Azul Systems. And what we do over at Azul is we're a Java-only company. We basically make JVMs and tools for people who build and deploy Java applications.
Incredibly important stuff, and a fellow DevRel professional.
And a fellow DevRel. I think we have the same job titles, surprisingly.
Yeah.
VP of Developer Relations. So this is fun. Yeah.
That's us. Who'd have thought?
Who'd have thought? 10 years ago,
not me.
Tim is all important and famous, and I'm just neither one of those. But that's okay, right?
I wouldn't say that. So, what's the first job you ever had, Pratik?
So, not counting the free labor that my parents got out of me, my mother and father owned a small business, and that's not very interesting. It was, doing work since, and you know how it is with the family business. You're 8 years old. You can go and mow the lawn or go do this and that and, whatever.
Lift things that aren't too heavy.
Lift things. But my first paid job where someone else was paying me and I wasn't paid in a roti or with, like clothes and stuff, was actually when I started at university. I went to UNC for undergrad, actually grad school too.
That's North Carolina, not Northern Colorado.
The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So the Tar Heels, as we like to say. You may, if you're not familiar with the University of North Carolina, you may know our most famous graduate is a fellow named Michael Jordan.
Maybe you heard of him.
You probably have heard of him. I've met the guy multiple times, actually. Oh, that's another story for later.
That's another podcast.
I think that's a great wonderful guy, by the way. So when I first joined, when I first went to UNC, like every other poor student, I needed money for Taco Bell and for beer. So I took a job as a computer lab assistant. So this is many, many years ago. And my job was to basically sit at a desk, and when someone had problem with the printer, I would go help them with the printer. If someone had problems with like something on the computing device they were using, it was a computer lab, I would go help the student or whoever sort it out. Right? It's like, oh, I can't get Microsoft Word to work, or I'm trying to print this, and it was actually a great job because I got paid. For those days, especially, quite well, to sit at a desk, and about 80% of the time, I would just do my homework. So It was great. Yeah.
I love it. Paid to do your homework and flex the computer troubleshooting skills.
Well, it was actually quite more than that. It's, I got to help people. That's how I got into very, very early on into kind of teaching, if you will, or training kind of stuff. It's like, oh, I don't know how to do this in Word, or I'm trying to use this software to like build this diagram for my class, and I would go and help them and stuff like that. And I got to meet a lot of great people through that. So some of the folks that would routinely come into the lab that I worked in, they would, I would see them on campus, and they would say, hey, there's Pratik. You're the dude that helped me figure out how to make words italics in Microsoft Word or something. And they're like, hey, we're going out to this bar on Friday. Why don't you come? So it was a great way to meet people, as as you do at college, to you meet people and expand your horizons and your friend groups and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and teaching's always been, I mean, for the 15 years I've known you, that's always been a part of who you are. So that's...
Yep, and it's great. I took a little bit of an aside to do a startup for a bit, and even when I was working in a large enterprise company, as you know, we both did a little technical road show that had training for many years.
Yes.
And then we both maybe at the same time pivoted to doing developer relations, which our job is basically helping people learn our technologies.
Yeah.
That's what we do every day, right?
That's what we do, and we both love it.
I certainly do.
So to do what we do, there's a lot of teaching, but it also requires being technical, having a background as an engineer. So in your history as an engineer, tell us about the most interesting problem you've ever solved.
Okay, so as you can imagine, there are many of them in a long, storied, and shall I say, infamous career.
It's just hard to pick because there are so many good ones. We'd have you back on the show. So
yes, of course. So I think my favorite one. It's not super technical, but I took a job at a large company here in Atlanta when I first moved here. After being in London, England for 5 years out of grad school. Another story, of course. And this was many years ago, right? So for those of the younger listeners out there, you probably have not heard of this version control system called PVCS Dimensions. Okay, it was.
We'll put a link in the show notes to the Wikipedia page.
I'm sure somebody still uses it. But anyways, this is before Subversion, and and after that came Git, which is what everyone pretty much uses now, as the folks listening now. So anyways, it was a version control system. Okay,
yeah. And one that kind of was larger companies, a commercial enterprise kind of thing, right?
Yeah, it wasn't open source. Back then there wasn't really any.
It's CVS,
but even predates CVS. Yes, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's like it goes way back, right? And it wasn't the most flexible. It was quite a rigid tool. And anyways, we were using this thing to manage our source system. And when you wanted to check stuff in, it would lock the repository, so no one else could check anything in until you release the lock, et cetera, right? Actually, that's not the main crux of the story. So there was a bottleneck there, right?
But it's not the crux of the story, but I want to make sure everybody understands. There's one thing you do to lock, and then you check in code, and then there's another thing you do to unlock. This is not like a transactional, or you just waits till you commit the transaction. Maybe you die, maybe you go home for the weekend. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? It was extremely inefficient to the way we work today. So thank God we have Git. So what would happen is that you check in code, and then the way that we did a build, right? Today we have CI pipelines, and we use tools like Jenkins or whatever, and it's amazing, right? It makes us more efficient as a dev team today. But so there was, for every release of approximately 30 developers on this team, they would pick one lucky person, and that person's job was, when they received an email that said, hey, I need a build, that person would go and lock the repo. They would pull down the source code and spend, I would say, the next 2 to 3 hours typing stuff in on the console and clicking things to produce a build. And that build they would then shepherd into a server for people to test.
World-class automation here.
Yeah, and again, for our younger viewers, this is many years ago, right? So
this is what it was like.
This is what
in
it was
our
like.
day,
right? So Tim, what does the word sneakernet mean?
Sneakernet, that means you write data, like a file, to a floppy diskette, and using your sneakers, you walk over to the computer of another colleague and insert the floppy diskette into that colleague's computer so they may copy the file.
Yes, so that's great, right? So thankfully this was past the sneakernet era, but so the problem there is that now you had to essentially dedicate an engineer whose primary task for those 3 months was to build and deploy the software. And I came in, and within a day or two, I was like, it was incredibly frustrating because I was like, all right, I'm ready to do a build. And I email somebody, that person's out to lunch or coffee, wait for them to come back. They do the build, and 3 hours later, I am able to click a button somewhere to see if my code worked. And you can imagine, very frustrating. So I went to the person I worked for, and I said, wow, how long have you guys been doing this? Of course, the answer is forever. I said, why don't you let me fix this? I did have a purely, let's improve the team motivation, but I had an extra motivation on top is because when I first started there, I was working as a contractor, getting paid hourly. So his question was, well, can you do this and your regular job? And I said, yeah, of course I can. Just pay me overtime. And they're like, okay, how will this help? I said, well, you can take that one person you assigned to do this, and instead of them not being very productive in contributing to, features or bug fixes,
sure,
they will actually be able to be part of the development process.
Yeah.
For the customer.
Do things that help that make customers' lives better and not just
build features. Right? Let's just say keep it at build features. Yeah. And so they agreed to it. I got paid a bunch of overtime for the next 2 months while I pulled this together. And everyone was like, wow, this is amazing, Pratik. And I said, thank you. I did this for myself, but I'm glad you like it too.
And that was the thing that you pulled together to talk about that. Now, a quick word from our sponsor. Confluent Developer, the podcast, is brought to you by Confluent Developer, the website, which has everything you need as a developer of data streaming systems. And it's completely free. We've got curriculum, hands-on exercises, executable tutorials, the online data streaming engineer certification, also free, a way to find a meetup near you, those are free. Everything is there. I really want you to be successful in your journey as a data streaming engineer, and this is the site that has what you need. Check it out at developer.confluent.io. That's developer.confluent.io. Now back to the show.
Yeah, it was basically just, I just wrote some bash scripts. And, the hard part was figuring out how to interface with PVCS dimensions. Because they had like some low-level library thing and being able to automatically pull that code. And, it was basically, I think a good way of putting it, it was like the precursor to DevOps. So it's like, let's automate this DevOps thing, or basically this development thing, or what we would call now DevOps, because it should be automated, and things will be faster, and everyone will be able to be more productive, and I can finally release my frustration of having to wait 3 hours for a build. I was able to take it from about 3 hours to the automated build took, I don't know, it was still slow. It took about 15 minutes with all the tests and pulling the code and building a jar file and then putting it on a server and all that kind of stuff. But hey, 15 minutes is still better than 3 hours.
This was Java.
It was a Java application.
If I may dig into,
please.
I think there's more story you want to tell, but I just want
to, please.
Build tools like Make. I mean, Make predates our careers. We both started writing software in the 90s, and Make was there when I walked in the room. I didn't personally come into the Java world until about 99, 2000.
Ooh.
And my first Java builds were with Make because it's what I knew. I had been writing C code, and I wrote Make files for Java. And then kind of Ant came along. What was building the Java code in this incredibly non-automated build that you started with?
You actually just said it. We were using a combination of Make files and Ant.
Okay. Again, links in the show notes. Kids, Ant is we'll link you to it. You can read about it.
Yeah. Yes, and it was a combination of Ant and Make files, and then when I got done with it, some Bash scripts. I avoid using Perl whenever possible, even though that would have helped me do it faster. Because I like to say that Perl is a write-only language, right? You write some Perl, and then you come back.
You can't read it.
You come back like an hour or two later, and you're like, I don't understand what this does anymore.
I have, I don't know if this is a flex or a shame. I've never written one line of Perl. So I just never touched it.
I don't think it's either a flex or a shame. I think you chose the right path. Unlike me, I did some Perl when I was in grad school and I was an undergrad because that was kind of the thing to do.
You were young and you needed the money. You didn't think that was going to end up on the internet. We've all made mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And okay, so the bash was automating the ant and make and testing and was there testing that it was executing?
Oh yeah, we wrote unit tests. And there were integration tests too. Okay, those are kind of thin, but there were unit tests.
Was there JUnit? Was there?
It indeed was JUnit. Okay, so JUnit's been around for a long time.
Yeah, it has. That's all. That's all like stuff. I mean, Kent Beck was doing that stuff pretty early on. So yeah, okay.
Yeah. Thankfully, it was, and this place had this company had a fairly good level of understanding of code hygiene. It's even back then. Back then, we didn't have, as an industry, we didn't have that much of an emphasis on writing unit tests. So we wrote unit tests. We would, if today we take a different approach to unit testing. It's much more rigorous, and we have things like code coverage. And we've evolved as an industry. Which
it's a design discipline as much as anything, right? It's an approach to designing software at a low level.
Yeah, absolutely. But we were writing unit tests. We would write them. We would do it differently today. We'd be a little bit more exhaustive in writing unit tests and stuff. But we did write unit tests, and that was a metric that we used. And that's something I pushed later quite hard. Okay, let's put some rigor around this automated testing stuff. Instead of having 30-40% of our stuff covered by unit tests, let's get to 70% at least. So that's something I pushed a bit further after I was there for a little while, and had a little bit of street cred, as they say, within my team and my company. So
right. And it's funny, Pratik, because this kind of thing is just table stakes now. Like this is just, I mean, we've got, a diversity of tools and people get in fights about which tool is better for building things. It's sort of the luxury of being able to have infighting around how we automate builds. Back in the day, you had to write all this stuff. And it was an initiative that you had to do a little persuading. So
absolutely.
I mean, I see why you chose this as an answer to most interesting problem, because I can see how transformative it was. But talk to us. What happened in the organization? What did you learn? Like, what did you carry with you?
It was transformative. Obviously, down at the lower end of the development type of discipline. But once my team did it, other teams were like, "Oh wow, this is awesome!" Right? It was a big division that had multiple teams inside of it, and everyone was kind of doing it the same way because that's how everyone does it. This is how it's always been done, kind of thing. You're well aware, and our listeners will be well aware of what momentum means to different dev teams or to dev teams. This is how we've always done it, right? And then someone has to go in and shake things up and say, let's try to find a better way to do it. And you have to convince people, and thankfully, I feel like most people in our discipline, in the careers that we do, generally tend to be open-minded about making positive change, especially when it's stuff that saves time and allows you to have less frustrating experience. Right. So, I mean, part of the stuff that we do, for example, Tim, is part of what we do is focus on developer experience, right? How do we make it easier for dev people to do stuff? And you and I both think about this, not all the time, because, we have the education portion and other things that we do as part of developer advocacy and relations. But I go back to my product managers, for example, at Azul, and I give them feedback from what developers tell me in the field to say, hey, I was talking to some developers about Azul code inventory, for example, and I say, they would like to see this, and I'll think about it and say, yeah, actually this makes sense, and I'll go to the product manager and say this will help improve the developer experience when they're using this tool. So let's try to make it a feature, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, the impact was pretty big, again at the low level, and Thankfully, it didn't require it didn't require any additional like hardware, stuff like that. It just required time. So it was a pretty easy sell when I went and pitched the initial case to them. Like, hey, it was actually very black and white in a lot of ways. It was we can take a person that is not doing anything productive and make them productive for business features. So, well, not hard to sell that to somebody.
Right.
And all it'll cost you is 2 months of one person hacking on this and don't really need to touch it again. Doesn't need constant maintenance and stuff like that. So,
right, fairly static build.
It didn't change. I mean, we changed it about 2 years later to use the state of the art in source code management, a tool called Subversion or SVN. So,
early 2000s. That was, that was a remarkable innovation. It
was state of the art at the time. So
it really was.
And it ran so much faster than PVCS dimensions, and you didn't have to lock the whole repo, which was the big thing. So
exactly. You could actually collaborate with people.
It was that's when the joy of fixing merge conflicts came into being. But I think we discovered as an industry, it's much better to fix merge conflicts than to lock a repo that 5 or 10 or 30 developers are working on. That slows everybody down. So.
Exactly. No, that's the thing. Same thing with the database rows that we might want to edit concurrently. We have higher bandwidth ways of managing that than everybody go away until I'm done.
Yeah, and actually, if you don't mind taking a small pivot here, I gave, and you'll like this because I actually watched your video on this topic about a month or so ago. It was your little Apache Iceberg video that you had up on YouTube.
Yes.
And I did a presentation at the Atlanta Java User Group just this past Tuesday on Iceberg. Iceberg and Spark and artificial intelligence, right? Because now you got to sprinkle a little AI and everything, right? So
you can't not.
Yeah. But that's one of the reasons I really like Iceberg is because it allows you to decouple almost your data from whoever wants to use it.
Yeah.
And it gives you the nice catalog, so it's described, and it makes you more efficient as a company, because now you have different dev teams that can use the same underlying data set, and they don't have to. It's still sitting in one Amazon S3 bucket somewhere, but it allows anybody access to it, so multiple teams can use it, and you don't have to worry about, because it's decoupled from compute. You can use Trino to look at that Apache Iceberg. I use Spark in my example, or and of course you work at Confluent, so I could use Flink or Kafka, and I could pump data into the same Apache Iceberg, a warehouse. And I don't have to disturb anybody else, or for that matter, ask anybody else's opinion if I could do this, permission. If I could do this, I can just make it a separate table or a separate namespace, right? So, anyways.
It is. It's a game changer in so many ways, really opening up a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
and I've never heard this story from you before. You and I have known each other for a long time, but I think it's really cool how there's this early career, super impactful thing that really was focused around a little bit of a cheesy phrase, but empathy for your fellow developers, right? Like you just want this to be better. You want things to be a little easier to use. It wasn't, let me tell you about this really cool data structure that I wrote a paper on. It was, I just want to make this thing better for people, so we're not doing dumb work. And then seeing your career unfold as largely an educator, right? Trying to help people be better at things and know things and be more effective. I love the connection there.
Yeah, thank you. It's, I'm sure you have a ton of stories around the same kind of thing. But I think in a lot of ways, it also helped set me up. You mentioned career in terms of a kind of a longer arc for, not just, it starts with the empathy of like, okay, let's make everyone's life on the dev team better, to it's a natural kind of progression into more of a leadership, team lead type of role, and then onwards from there.
Exactly.
So for those folks who are newer to this software development world, if you want to become a leader, that's a great way to have a stepping stone. It's like, how can I help my people on my dev team, right? And that, that it helps you. It's not just the empathy part. Then it also helps you think about the bigger picture. And leadership is a lot, as you know, and everyone knows, leadership is also a lot about thinking about the bigger picture. The bigger picture doesn't have to be this big, right? It can just be, how can I make my dev team more efficient? Or how can we do cloud deployments that don't use as many resources so that we save the company money so we can spend it on something else that's more impactful? I don't know, all those kinds of things. So
my guest today has been Pratik Patel. Pratik, thanks for being a part of Confluent Developer.
Thank you, Tim, for having me.